He is a principal security consultant in the risk management and governance practice at NCC Group, the largest pure play security consulting firm in the world, headquartered and listed in the UK with a major and growing US subsidiary. He has 15 years of experience in information risk and security as both an operator and a consultant. He has several articles on cloud computing available online and served as a technical editor for an authoritative textbook on the subject. He holds an undergrad degree in information technology from, I believe that's Triple IT, Calcutta, and an MBA from the University of Notre Dame. He is also certified in CISSP, CISA, CSIM, CRISC, CGEIT, and PMP, and also has several ITL intermediate certifications. He's going to read a little bit about psychology of the fish, leverage the 7 principles of influence. My name is Majid, and here's our presenter.
Thank you, Majid, for the introduction. I hope all of you guys can hear me, and thank you for that biography. Actually, you missed out on one certification, which I got after I had submitted my proposal. But I mean, that basically shows that I'm good at taking multiple choice exams, right? So my topic for today is psychology of the fish, leveraging the 7 principles of influence. Majid already gave my introduction, but I'll just go through that quickly. I work as a principal security consultant at NCC Group. I have experience working both as an operator in security teams in different companies, as well as a consultant advising such teams. Instantly, that picture that you see is different from what you see on your screen right now when I'm speaking, because that is one example of deprecated information that I'm okay with, unlike all things security. That is actually my MBA headshot from a decade back. Now that you've seen you've seen my profile, you can see that I'm definitely not a psychologist, right? But the topic is psychology of the fish. Why am I speaking about that? Well, I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspects of phishing. This presentation combines lessons from my MBA studies, along with my experience working in InfoSec, both as an operator and an advisor. And even though I'm not a psychologist, I will be leveraging the work of kind of the guru of influence, and I'll get to that later. Before I go into the 7 principles of influence and how they are exploited in phishing, I would like to take a few minutes to discuss why is phishing popular. I'll start off with this quote by Kevin Mitnick. I'm sure all of you have heard this name, a very famous person in hacking and subsequently security awareness. And he said, most of the computer compromises that we hear about use a technique called spear phishing. It's extremely difficult to defend against. Now, if you have an email address, and who doesn't, right? I mean, you must have received phishing emails from exotic princes and damsels in distress offering millions of dollars in emails full of wrong spellings and bad grammar, to sophisticated targeted emails that spoof legitimate addresses and replicate official templates. Phishing emails span a wide maturity spectrum. And here are some raw numbers. I just went back a couple of years just to show that this is not an emerging problem, but has been a problem, persistent problem over several years. And you can see that even back in 2017, 76% of organizations were targeted by phishing emails. And 1.4 million new phishing sites were being created each month. In 2018, phishing accounted for 32% of data breaches and 78% of cyber espionage activity. So even if more sophisticated methods were actually used for those data breaches and cyber espionage, often the methodology used to gain ingress into the target environment is simple phishing. And in 2019, business email compromise, which is a kind of phishing where the attacker impersonates a senior executive or somebody in authority asking somebody else to do something risky, such as like wiring money to a fraudulent account. That kind of attack basically led to $1.7 billion in losses last year. And this is directly from the FBI. So I just want to talk about the economics of email fraud. Now, the popularity of phishing is driven not only by its success, but its success relative to its cost. In other words, with a small investment, and obviously investment in courts because we are talking about the criminals here, with a small investment in time and money, the returns can be significant. In other words, the ROI is extremely good. Again, good from the attacker's perspective. Now, due to mass emailing tools, which can be legitimate, and mailing lists, which can be both legitimate, such as like they obtain from a marketing firm with which the consumers have shared information, or they can be illegitimate, such as acquired on the dark web. Due to these tools and these mailing lists, it's quite inexpensive to carry out a phishing campaign. And here are some numbers which kind of illustrate this fact. Back in 2008, so this is a pretty old, 12 years have gone by, and as we know, technology and everything is changing, but I think this is relevant. I believe the problem would be even more persistent today. But in 2008, researchers from UC Berkeley and UC San Diego, they infiltrated the Storm Botnet. Now, this is a botnet that is used to run fake spam campaigns, stuff like that. And they leveraged this botnet to send 350 million emails over 26 days and made 28 sales of approximately $100 each. So on the surface, this seems like very poor return on investment, right? It seems a lot of effort for very little money. Especially if you crunch the numbers, it seems it's only a 0.00001% response rate. As I said, like approximately $100 a day. But the fact of the matter is, this experiment used only 1.5% of the botnet, and with 100% use, the daily revenue could have been as high as $7,000 per day. Now, considering the very little effort and money expended, that's a lot of money. That's quite a chunk of change. Now, moving on to the core of this presentation, the 7 principles of influence. And I would like to start off by quoting John Hancock. The name is synonymous with the signature. And incidentally, he was a signatory to the Declaration of Independence. And he said, the greatest ability in business is to get along with others and to influence their actions. Now, as I had mentioned earlier, that I will be leveraging the work of somebody who is kind of the authoritative word on the subject, and that person is Professor Robert Cialdini. As you can see from his very impressive bio, right, he has authored bestsellers in influence marketing. He has advised the cream of the industry. And I was introduced to his work in an MBA course on leadership and organizational behavior. Now, whether you're the CEO of a global conglomerate or a small entrepreneur, your success in business is directly proportional to your ability to influence people. And this is true of the enterprising Fisher as well. And unlike me, you can see that Professor Cialdini is definitely a psychologist. Now, moving on to the principles themselves. The first principle, reciprocity. This is very simple. It's like simple give and take. You do something to get something, right? So you do a favor, you expect a favor back, right? And there are some subtle nuances here. Uh, if you want a favor from somebody, you should ideally act first, right? Do them a favor first, and ideally act multiple times so you create a bank of favors. And the other aspect is if somebody refuses a favor the first time, right? Especially a bigger favor, the next time you ask for a smaller favor, the chances are higher that that person will agree. And here are some real life examples. Dr. Cialdini sent Christmas cards to strangers, and many sent him cards in return. Now, obviously, these are complete strangers, right? They have never communicated with the doctor before. And just because they received a Christmas card, they returned the favor and sent one back. Also, people who were asked to volunteer to and to a non-government organization, they refused to commit to a year, which was the larger favor, but they agreed to few hours of their time, which again is a smaller favor. So these are the real life examples in action of what I just spoke about this reciprocity principle. Now, how does this translate to phishing? Now, let's say an email which promises to give access to valuable information if an attachment is downloaded or a link is clicked. In other words, when the expectation is that you are downloading an attachment or clicking a link, that is, you are doing a favor, and that's why you're getting this favor back of access to confidential information. And it can be worded like click here to access your new salary after the latest pay revisions. So this is a very common phishing technique. Principle two, scarcity. Again, something that we are all familiar with, that people want what is difficult to get, right? And exclusivity kind of makes it more attractive and often more expensive, right? As um, like the high fashionable items, Balenciaga, Fendi, etc., can attest. Now, there's a very interesting nuance here. The fear of losing out is more influential than the joy of winning. So let's say you want something and you get it. Obviously, there's a joy. But if you really want something and you don't get it, that that pain of losing out, that is more than the joy of winning it or getting it. So a real life example: a television commercial advertised a product with a message over 500 sold, right? But it was more successful when advertising the message was only 25 left to sell. So that means they are trying to um, use this principle of scarcity, right? And trying to communicate that the consumer, you may lose out on getting this unless you call first, right? So that kind of drives that behavior. Again, how does this relate to phishing? So an email stresses access to available information, right? So, for example, your email access, it says access is available only if certain action is taken within a short period of time, right? So if you don't do it, you lose out on something that you already have. And it can be worded like install this Microsoft Outlook patch to continue having access to your email. Again, a very common phishing technique. Principle three, authority. People defer to authority, actual or assumed. Obviously, it's better if it's actual, but again, like if you can fake it till you make it, that works as well. And claims backed by leaders or experts are influential. A real life example: there was this infamous Ingram experiment conducted in 1961 by Professor Ingram. That's who the experiment is named after. And what he did was he created a prison like environment, right? And he had volunteers acting as jailers and prisoners. And what he demonstrated was that it is possible to make the jailers uh, be very cruel to the prisoners, right? Basically, act in a manner that is beyond their normal behavior, just because someone in authority asks them to. And this is something that we have seen in real life a lot in dictatorships, during wars, conflicts, etc. A phishing example here: an email from the CEO supposedly instructs accounts payable to make an unusual payment, right? So this is again that business email compromise that I mentioned earlier. Now, this person may not even be the actual CEO, right? This may be a phisher. But just because it seems to be coming from the CEO, a person in authority, there is less likelihood that the recipient is going to confirm the authenticity of the email, but would rather act on it quickly and obviously basically get phished. So this such an email can be worded like pay 105K by wire transfer to this new vendor immediately. Again, something which, as you saw from the ABA numbers, very, very common. Principle four, consistency. Now, everyone is a creature of habit, right? People respond positively to a request that is consistent with things they've previously done or agreed to do. And a real life example of this, Charlie Trotter's is an exclusive Chicago restaurant. Now, it was facing a problem with no shows, as in, like, people would call up to reserve tables, right? But their plans changed and they would never call up to cancel that reservation. So, obviously, the restaurant was losing money because this was a reservation that could have been given to someone who would actually had made it to the restaurant, or maybe even walk ins. So initially, what Charlie Trotters was doing, the reception desk, was that if somebody called to request a reservation, they would be requested that, hey, if your plans change, please call us up and let us know, right? So we'll like cancel that reservation. But obviously, it wasn't working, right? I mean, that was the problem in the first place, the problem of no shows. So what they did was, instead of saying that, hey, please let us know if your plans change, they reworded the script a little bit. They started saying that, hey, if your plans change, can you please call us? Can you please call us, or can you please? Sorry, let me repeat that. So what they said was that, hey, if your plans change, can you please call us? And they elicited a response, right? They elicited a positive yes response. In other words, there was an implied promise there, right? So they are just not telling the customer, they are just asking the customer to do something and getting a response in return, a yes response. And this implied response was successful in reducing no shows. The reason being, people in general are good, right? They like to keep their word, especially for something as small as this. And if they've given their word that they're going to call if they cancel, if the plans change, that's exactly what they started doing. Now, a parallel with phishing. The best example here is how phishers impersonate known brands, right? So let's say Amazon. Everybody shops at Amazon. Everybody receives packages from Amazon. Now, if an email from Amazon shows up, right, and asks for action to be taken, there's a high likelihood that the recipient is going to click on that link or perform that action. And this can be like worded as, hey, your Amazon package is on the way. Please click here to confirm your shipping address. Now, this tactic actually works even if the recipient is not expecting a package. So they have not ordered anything, they're not expecting a package, but just by force of habit, and just because it's something that they've done before, I mean, they have been receiving packages, they get phished. Principle 5, consensus. This is all about the power of the crowd. And crowds are very powerful. I mean, people tend to follow the crowd. I mean, this crowd can be like mobs during riots. It can be like fans at a rock concert, but people tend to go along, right? And a real life example, a TV commercial ended with a call to action. Operators are standing by, please call. However, the competitor was actually more successful by saying that if operators are busy, please call again. In other words, our products are so popular with the crowd that our phone lines can be busy. So that implied popularity with the crowd led to greater sales. Now, a parallel in phishing. An email which says that how many of the recipient's colleagues have already acted in a certain manner. So it can be worded like 544 of 800 employees have updated their OS. So please click this link to download. So the recipient feels, hey, my colleagues have been doing this, so this seems to legit, so I should click the link. Again, a tactic which is very successful. Principle 6, the last of the original 7 principles, the 7th was added later. Principle 6 is liking. People make requests to people they like or those who like them, because the chances of success of getting that request approved is higher. Conversely, if a person wants to be liked, they do say yes. And again, a real life example. I mean, this is a fact of life, right? I mean, your significant other will ask you for a bigger favor than your colleague. And again, a parallel in phishing. An email from HR, again, supposedly not an actual email, asks a new employee who is obviously eager to be liked for confidential information. And it can be worded like, we don't have your SSN in our records. Can you please reply to this email with the information? And phishers really exploit this. In fact, uh, phishers go dumpster diving to retrieve any printed documentation which gives them an indication, names of people who have recently joined. And then they try to kind of guess that email address, first name dot last name at companydomain.com, and target them with phishing requests, phishing emails such as this. Now, the final principle, principle 7, it's called unity. So again, as I said, this was not in the original list, but the idea behind this is the more we identify ourselves with others, the more we are influenced by them, right? So it's like if we are part of a group, right, and if a request emanates from another person in that group, we are more likely to say yes. And politicians are really good at exploiting this, right? They want to be shown as the candidate of the people. And that's why, unlike before, uh, they are okay with admitting their faults, right? Which make them seem more relatable, more humane. And that's why an admission of drug use or infidelity is no longer a deal breaker, because it makes the candidate more like the people they're asking votes from. A real life example, again going back to Dr. Cialdini, he asked his students' parents to complete a questionnaire, and the response rate was abysmal, right? It was only 20%. So, what he did was he offered one extra point. If you think about it, that's one extra point in one test throughout the semester is inconsequential, right? It won't change the grade, not usually. But he offered that, and the response rate jumped to 97%. The reason being, the students and their parents, they're part of the family, right? They're part of the same family. And the idea of helping out a family member is very, very uh, influential, right? It can drive significant human behavior. An example in phishing now, email from someone with a shared interest prompting action for a shared benefit, right? So it can be worded like, as a fellow cat lover, obviously the fisher would have done their research to confirm that you're actually a cat lover and not a dog lover. I mean, they can find that information even through open source intelligence by trawling social media profiles. And then they send this email that, as a fellow cat lover, can you please sign this petition for adoption? And to sweeten the pot, they can even say that, okay, here are some cute cat pictures. So the link may be a phishing link. The cat pictures may actually be a malicious attachment. But again, this is a tactic that phishers often use. In my experience, phishers use all of the 7 principles of influence. And that is why, as security professionals, we should be cognizant of those. Now, the next section, how to protect against phishing. So first, I would like to talk about the castle approach. Now, in medieval days, right, it was the responsibility of the local lord of the castle to protect his environment, right? And that's why he had all this multiple layers of security: the outer wall, the moat, inner wall, watchtowers, guards asking for passwords, etc. So this like different layers of security. The idea being that if one fails, hopefully the others won't. Now, today, CISOs are the lords of the modern castle of the enterprise, right? And they also implement this, right? And that's why the entire approach is called castle approach. There are other names like layered security, defense in depth. But the idea is simple, right? Multiple layers of controls, redundancy built in, so that if one control fails, the others don't. And the simplest implementation is the layers of administrative, physical, and technical controls. Administrative, obviously, are the rules, right? Policies, procedures, standards. Then it also includes security awareness. The technical controls are obviously the hardware and software controls, whereas physical controls relate to a physical asset. Now, specific to phishing, I think we can dispense with physical controls and talk about technical and administrative controls only. Now, technical controls. There are many, right? There are several technical controls to combat phishing. I won't go through a lot of detail in all of them because, in my experience, organizations are actually quite good at implementing technical controls. But as you can see on your screen, we have spam filtering, right? Filtering out emails based on certain criteria, such as keywords, embedded URLs. There's IP blacklisting, which blocks emails from specific IPs or IP ranges. Can be from high-risk nations such as North Korea. Uh, those IPs may actually feature in certain DNS-based blacklists. So IP blacklisting is a mechanism, is a technical control to block those. Then you have web proxy, which blocks access to phishing sites rather than the phishing emails themselves. Again, the rules to block the sites can be based on some kind of executable content on those sites, the location of the servers which host those sites, etc. Additional technical controls include SPF, Sender Policy Framework, where the email server basically authenticates the email, uh, it basically checks whether it originates from an authorized IP or gateway based on the DNS record for that sending domain. DKIM, domain keys identified email, also an authentication method that expends SPF. Basically, the receiving email server checks the email to see whether it has been digitally signed. And then you have DMARC, which builds on SPF and DKIM, and it can include both SPF and DKIM, and it can also, uh, I mean, the admin can actually specify the action to be taken, right? If it fails authentication, whether it would still be sent ahead, hopefully not, or it will be quarantined or straight away rejected. So, I mean, in my experience, as I said, technical controls are really good at especially at larger organizations. But where the gap lies is in administrative controls, and I'll get to that right now. I think this quote by Bruce Schneier, he's a noted cryptographer. I think this is very telling. And he said, amateurs hack systems, professionals hack people. And obviously, he's talking about cyber attackers. Now, why technical controls fail is because of this. So, with so many technical controls, you can see that organizations are still falling prey to phishing. And that is a function of the sheer volume of such phishing emails, as well as the increased sophistication of the attackers. So in that case, the last line of defense is the person, is the recipient, the human element. And as you can see from that cartoon, with even with multiple controls, you can still be compromised if you have Dave. Apologies to any Daves in the audience, but that's what this human error is named here. I absolutely love this cartoon and I've used it several times. I think it is very apt and very impactful. Now, speaking of administrative controls, the idea that you should seek to implement is I hear, I know, I see, I remember, I do, I understand. Now, nothing creates understanding like actually getting phished, but I mean, obviously, you don't want that. So, the next best thing are phishing simulations. So, my recommendation is that conduct phishing simulations, but do so irregularly, right? If you do it regularly, then the recipients kind of get the hang of it that, hey, on the third of every month, we are going to receive a phishing email and we shouldn't click on that. And these emails should be designed to leverage one or more of the principles of influence that we covered earlier. And those who click should be required to take additional training. And this is very important, right? Obviously, you don't want that behavior to be repeated. Now, there are some common indicators that you can train users on. One is that uppercase, right? Uppercase, the letter I It displays the same as lowercase l in sans serif fonts, right? So if you receive an email in that font and an expected I is interchanged with an L, it would be difficult to detect, right? So be careful of that. Similarly, certain Unicode characters can resemble ASCII characters. So the letter, let's say A, in the English alphabet, there are some other alphabets or Unicode characters which look very similar to that A. So obviously those are two different things, right? And links with those two different letters will take you to different locations on the internet. So be aware of that. Browsers can actually pick up a lot of these, right? So it's very important to keep the browsers updated. But the basic idea is distrust and verify, right? The idea is if it's too good to be true, it probably is. So supplementing phishing simulations with training, security awareness training, can definitely help your organization against falling prey to phishing. Moving on, the last part of this presentation, anecdotes and lessons learned. And here I would like to quote this great philosopher, Kanye West. He said, I was never really good at anything except for the ability to learn. So here are some mistakes I've made. At a previous employer, the chairman of the board would always click on mock phishing links during simulations. Executives are often not tech savvy, but hold the keys to the kingdom, right? They have privileged access, they have access to the most critical assets. And that's why there is a specific term for phishing them. It's called whaling. Some of you may may already know this, but in casinos, right, the people who bet the most money and usually lose the most money are called whales. And casinos love them, right? And that's why they wine and dine them, they comb their expenses, but the expectation is that they will get much more money out of them on the casino floor. But the second example, the CEO at a client emailed the accounting department to wire a payment to an existing vendor, but on an updated account number. Again, business email compromise, right? Expected plot twist, it was not the CEO emailing, and there was no updated account number. The third example is actually from my personal experience. I fell for a password reset phish impersonating Craigslist. The small screen size of my phone did not help, right? I didn't really check the URL and all that, which was obviously a mistake. But thankfully, a light kind of went off in my head after I changed the password. I looked again carefully, saw the obvious red flags, and changed my password again. So the idea is that security professionals are not immune to falling prey to phishing. In conclusion, I would like to say that if you're conducting phishing simulations as you should, and the click rates in phishing simulations are not going down, let senior management know, right? So the idea is that if you conduct phishing simulations over a period of time, the number of click-through rates will obviously go down, right? It's a decreasing trend. If that doesn't happen, there's something that needs to be escalated. Maybe stronger measures are required. The second thing is if executives are repeatedly falling victim, as I mentioned in my first example on lessons learned earlier, if executives are falling victim, don't excuse them from training and hope the problem goes away. The reason I say that is because I have myself experienced it. Uh, when I was doing this phishing simulations at a former employer, the chairman would be clicking, as I said, and the CTO actually asked me that, hey, can we just not include him? Can we just exclude his email from future exercises? And I pushed back. I said, we shouldn't do that, right? Because as you know, he has a lot of privileged access. And if a phisher gets compromises his account, right, that basically leaves the organization open to a lot of harm. So the idea is if you receive a request like this, push back. Finally, even with all the technical controls, which as I said, I've seen a lot of organizations are good at, even with all the administrative controls, right? There is always this risk of confirmation bias, right? So to prevent that, to ensure you're doing what you should be doing, it sometimes makes sense to bring in a third-party expert. Obviously, this is a pitch for people like me, security consultants, but sometimes it does make sense to bring in an expert to play the devil's advocate. Now, finally, we are at the end of my presentation. I would like to sign off by quoting this, perhaps the greatest philosopher of the modern age, Dilbert, or rather his creator, Scott Adams. And he said, "You don't have to be a person of influence to be influential. In fact, the most influential people in my life are probably not even aware of the things they've taught me." I hope you found this presentation on the principles of influence to be somewhat influential. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
All right, that was an amazing presentation, my salary. Very informative, and I learned a lot through this also. And yes, they're giving you some great presentations, and thanks
Sure.
in the chat over there. All right, guys, we got some time left on here. Actually, plenty of time. We actually do have one Q&A there. Are you able to see that now?
I don't see a question, sorry.
Okay. If you want, I can.
Actually, yeah, I got it. Yeah, I got it. Yeah. Phishing
Cool.
has been around for a long time. Do you think there ever be sorry, do you think there will ever be a point where people stop falling for phishing scams? Okay, great answer. And my answer is no. I don't think we'll ever see a time where people will stop falling for phishing scams, because people are trusting by nature, right? And phishers are really getting good at exploiting psychology to exploit. I mean, if you think about it, right, phishing is part of social engineering. And social engineering means that it exploits the normal social behavior, right? It is predicated on exploiting that behavior. And since man is a social animal, and woman, obviously, we are not going to see the end of phishing. Technical controls may improve, right? But the social engineering aspect of it will persist, and it will continue to be successful, hopefully with increasing awareness, security awareness, and maybe sessions like this, knowledge sharing sessions like this. It may go down, but it won't ever disappear.
All right, great response. Does anybody else have any questions? Don't hesitate to put that in the Q&A section. We have a plenty of time here. It's supposed to go till 5:59, so if you have
I,
any questions, you
I,
could
I, I
definitely reach out.
I think I spoke a little fast.
Oh no, that's perfectly fine. There's no time limit on your speech. Yep, got another one there.
What is the strongest yet nicest thing you can say to someone who has repeatedly failed a phishing simulation in order to deter them from doing it again? Great question. I would say you are too trusting, man. Don't trust everything you see or hear. That's the strongest yet nicest thing that I would say to that person.